I know I can't be the only one that's heard something from the pulpit so many times that you lose count, only to go home and whether it's during your devotional time or individual study, you read something that it doesn't work. There's an obvious conflict here. So what do you do with that?
Refine us, Father. My heart's one desire is to be holy, set apart for you, Lord. I choose to be holy, set apart for you, my Master, ready to do your will.
Hi, friends. So I guess I'm kicking a hornet's nest again. Yeah. Leaven. Who hasn't heard leaven means sin? I think they got it wrong on this one, and I'm going to show you why. Because if you go into Scripture and you apply leaven is sin to each and every instance that you find it, there's some problems, because Jesus likens the kingdom of heaven to leaven. So you mean Jesus is saying that the kingdom of heaven is like sin? And if leaven is sin, why during the offering brought at Pentecost or Shavuot are the loaves leavened? This is an offering to God. It's a wave offering, not burnt, so there is not a conflict. But it's they're loaves to God. You bring sin to God, yes, for salvation, but as an offering? So let's jump right into it. I want to preface this with saying I am not going to throw each and every single instance of leaven in the New King James Bible onto the screen this time. I am just picking a couple verses to highlight kind of what I've hinted at. And I will say there are some things that I still want to study out. I want to see if I can figure out where the idea of leaven being sin came from. I'd like to figure out where it originated. It originated with someone who. But with that being said, so I want to start with looking at Exodus 12, verses 15 through 19. And at this time, the children of Israel are still in Egypt, but they're receiving the command on what the Feast of Unleavened Bread is to look like. So what the feast that they're going to be celebrating as they're leaving Egypt is to look like. And it starts in verse 15 saying, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. And so in this instance, this is the first time leaven is mentioned in Scripture. And there's a lot of scholars that will look at the principle of first mention as being something that kind of helps to establish a definition for what the word actually means when applied throughout the remainder of Scripture. And in this case, you're obviously dealing with a physical thing. You're dealing with the leaven that anybody who has made bread or cakes or different items is very familiar with. It's something that lifts up, it puffs up the bread, it makes it so it's not quite so dense and it's a little bit more enjoyable. It's something that you don't need much, and it spreads throughout the entire item that you're making. So there's not really a lot to go on to be able to say that this means something in particular, unless you consider the timing of this. Like I said, this is before Israel has been freed from their bondage. They're about to be, but they're still slaves in Egypt. And so they're dealing with 430 years of indoctrination into what at that point in time was the most occultic society ever. And so they've learned a lot of bad habits, a lot. And so here you have God telling them, there's something you need to get rid of before you leave. You need to get rid of their leaven. Okay, so let's hold on to that for a minute. Let's see what else we got. Let's look at the word that's actually used there for leaven, which is Strong's number 7603. So, or I guess would be an approximation of how it's pronounced. And this word, it's translated leaven. There's really nothing to it. It's not some hidden thing. It comes from another word. It's a barm, which is liquid leaven. So something that you would get from the fermentation of alcohol, or a yeast cake as swelling by fermentation. It's a leaven. There's nothing hidden there to really give it anything to go on. Leaven is leaven. So the next verse that I wanted to look at is Leviticus chapter 2, verse 11, which specifies that no grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven. For you shall burn no leaven, nor any honey in any offering to the Lord made by fire. Now, like I said, that's not a problem with what we're about to look at in Leviticus 23, because the offering is not burned. But it's very clear, you do not bring a sacrifice that is to be burned that contains leaven. So the word that's actually used in this verse is different than the one that is used in Exodus. This word that is translated leaven is chametz, and the definition is still that which is leavened. This one appears a lot more times than the initial verse or the initial word that was used, but still, the definition is still leaven, leavened bread, ferment. It's the same idea. It's nothing that we aren't aware of at this point. The thing that becomes kind of a question mark is when you're reading and you get to Leviticus 23. And I'm looking specifically at Leviticus 23, verse 17, which states, "You shall bring from your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits to the Lord." Okay, so what do you do with this? You have now a command. Bring leavened bread to the Lord. Offer it. It goes to the priests for their sustenance, and they're going to be eating it. It is not burned on the altar, but you're commanded to bring leavened loaves to God. But then leaven is kind of a forgotten topic, unless or except for when you find it in Amos, until you get to the New Testament, where in Matthew 13:33, Jesus uses it in a parable, saying, "Another parable he spoke to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal until it was all leavened." So again, like I said before, Jesus would not be calling the kingdom of heaven sin. That's paradoxical. So perhaps the definition that we've heard all along could be wrong. And we have to ask ourselves, are we so sure that everybody else got it right? Or perhaps we're more concerned with going along with the crowd because that's what's commonly accepted, instead of asking questions and investigating things and being willing to stand up and say, you know what? I think the word says something different, and here's why. If we go a little bit further into the Gospel of Matthew, we come to Matthew 16, verses 6 through 12, where it says, "Jesus said to them, 'Take heed and beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.' And they reasoned among themselves, saying, 'It is because we have taken no bread.' But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, 'O you of little faith, Why do you reason among yourselves? Because you have brought no bread. Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves and the 5,000, and how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves and of the 4,000, and how many large baskets you took up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And there you kind of have it. Perhaps throughout the entirety of Scripture, leaven was meant to signify doctrine. And doctrine is something that it isn't just beliefs you cling to. It's the way you live your life. It's not just, oh, well, I believe this in this context. You go back to the kingdom of heaven parable, where it's something that is added to 3 different measures of meal. How many of us can look at our own individual lives and kind of look at it as, well, I have a professional life, wherever my job is, or however I conduct myself in a professional manner. I have the private life, where I am possibly a slightly different person around those that I'm absolutely comfortable with. And then there's the religious life. 3 different lumps. You add doctrine to it, it's going to permeate all of it, or at least it's intended to permeate all of it. And that doctrine can either be the doctrine of the gospel, of Jesus Christ, of what Scripture teaches, or it'll be the doctrine of the world, which is going to lead you astray, which is going to influence, even in very subtle ways, the way you think, the way you act, the way you speak things. Perhaps leaven is doctrine. It's not sin. It can become sin, because if you let your doctrine become corrupt and show itself in various ways that are ungodly and don't glorify him and honor him and do not fall in line with the statutes and things that he has said, yeah, that's sin. But is it directly sin, or is it something else? And the last thing that I wanted to take a look at was actually the Thayer's entry specifically for the word that is used in Greek in the New Testament for leaven, because there's only one word used, and that word is zume, which of course the definition and the usage is leaven, ferment, both literally and metaphorically. So Helps actually goes into it a little bit, saying, leaven, yeast, figuratively, the spreading influence of what is typically concealed, but still very dramatic. And if you scroll down further to the Thayer's Greek lexicon, which again, this is included on Bible Hub as a totally free resource. Down here, you can actually find Matthew 16:6 to Matthew 16:12, where it says that it explains of the teaching of the Pharisees, Luke, the passage cited more correctly, definitely, of their hypocrisy. Absolutely, they were hypocrites. Jesus called them out repeatedly for that. However, let's look at the rest of what it says here. It is applied to that which, though small in quantity, yet by its influence, thoroughly pervades a thing, either in a good sense, as in the parable, Matthew 13:33 and Luke 13:21, or in a bad sense, of a pernicious influence, as the proverb, a little leaven leavens the whole lump, states. So at that point, what do you make of that? They're all looking at the fact that this is something that there's good and there's bad. Okay? There's no good in sin. There's not. You can try and justify it all you want, but there's no good in it. So to me, that kind of rules out leaven is sin. So are we willing to study things out and potentially correct our definitions? Are we willing to study things out and ask the questions that perhaps this hasn't been taught correctly? Perhaps we're slightly off base. Are we willing to study it out? And then are we willing to stand up when the situations arise and say, you know what? I don't think that's correct. Let me explain why. Because if we learn all these things and keep them to ourselves, what good is it? We're supposed to be learning these things so that we can be salt and light. And a light isn't kept under a basket. You're not supposed to keep things to yourselves. You're supposed to encourage others around you to share what you've learned, to be that iron that sharpens iron. And sometimes people don't like the sound of the iron as it approaches. There's probably going to be fights because you have a question and you've studied it out and you've come to a different conclusion. But I would encourage you that there are others out there, absolutely, because I know I'm not special. I'm not the only one. There are others out there that are asking questions because what they read and what they've been told don't necessarily match up. And so I'd say keep reading, keep digging. You're gonna find gold. I'll see you next time, friends.